It's the Gear Tester here, and welcome to my review and cutting test on the Ontario Air Force Survival Knife. This is an excellent tool. It's constructed of 1095 carbon steel, has a 5-inch blade. The blade is 0.8 inches thick, and the knife, not counting the sheath, weighs in at 9.9 ounces. I thought I'd start out here, this review on the Ontario Air Force Survival Knife, doing some chopping or some cutting. I try not to do a whole lot of chopping with these smaller sized blades. I think of the Ontario Air Force Survival Knife as kind of a medium to small size fixed blade knife. Alright, so we're just going to do some batoning here. It is very capable. It's a very capable tool. You can definitely do batoning with it to open up pieces of wood. You can see there's some snow on the ground here. Baton another little piece here. And it's cold today. So cold and wet. So being able to open up pieces of wood and get to the centers of the wood that is drier is definitely a benefit, and the Ontario Air Force Survival Knife definitely allow you to do that. Move here to another piece. And one of the benefits of that thick, relatively thick blade at 0.18 inches is that you're able to do this kind of work. I've had this knife in my possession for over 9.5, 10 years, and it's done very well for me. Before that, I'm sure it was used by other individuals. It's marked in a way that makes me think that this knife was produced in 91, so 1991, as I'm reading where it's marked here on the back of this bolt that holds the blade and things together. This bolt, the back handle portion, it's actually peened, it's not screwed on. I'll show you guys a closer up look at this knife on the tabletop portion of this review, where I can get inside and control lighting and the situation better. But you can see this is a capable knife. It has a saw portion on the back of the blade. I'm not super in love with that back saw portion. I think it's a little silly, this knife, because it's so thick. It's too thick to make a nice saw because it is such a wide tool. So you can see I can kind of cut through there, but it basically bottoms out when you just get a little bit through the piece of wood. So it makes, in my view, a horrible saw, and it just gets all gunked up. It's too thick of a blade to make a good saw, and if you were going to make a knife that did make a good saw on the back of it, then it really, to me, would be too thin of a blade to really baton and do heavy work like this knife is intended for. So I'm just going to do some carving here. Flip around. And, it is capable to do some chopping with this blade. I try to kind of avoid big amounts of chopping, but you can see here that you are able to do finer work. If you wanted to make a fuzz stick, if you wanted to break up, this is a very thin, very lightweight, and very dry for the other wood that's out here piece of material I'm working on here. It definitely does a good job of sharpening those little, cutting those little pieces of wood down into a situation that makes them much more ignitable, much easier to catch a flame and get them to go there. So you can see this knife is capable of small operations, small tasks. It's also able to baton through those bigger pieces of wood. You can see one of the things I'm struggling with is I like to get my thumb up to kind of control the finer cuts and movements, and one of the things that this knife has a problem with is because of that saw blade that on the back, those serrations, it kind of cuts into my fingers and makes it a little bit painful to do that. So that's one of the things that I don't like about this knife. But on the flip side of that, the cost of this knife is actually very good. You'll be able to pick this knife up with the sheath for around $45 or $50. And I think that means that this knife represents actually a very good bargain for the quality of tool you're getting. So there's some trade-offs one way or the other, but I think that this Ontario Air Force survival knife does represent a good value. It is able to do those finer tasks that you would want a blade to do. And for me, one of the big benefits is it has that thick blade, and it has the ability to baton and be used as a tool that will do almost everything you would need in a survival situation. And that's exactly what it was designed to do by the Air Force, as they were seeking a pilot's survival knife. So it's a great blade. One of the other things that we should mention here is you can see there are some holes right here in the cross guard there. You can see some holes there, and my understanding is that was originally intended to be able to tie rope or like paracord or some cordage through and allow you to affix this to the end of a pole and make a spear. I'm not very much interested in doing that. If this is my one or my primary tool, or even a secondary tool, like maybe I have an axe, I'm not interested in affixing that to a spear and throwing it or trying to stab something and have an animal run off with this attached to their body. I'm not interested in doing that. So I think that's kind of a silly feature to have included those little holes there to tie into some kind of a rope or something to tie into a spear. I don't really like that feature. You can see here's the back of the blade. You can see there it's peened. It's not screwed on, even though this kind of looks like a bolt, or that's not what's going on there. It's actually pushed through and then peened off. So it's a very sturdy situation there. It's not probably as sturdy as other knives that have a handle like this knife, where it's bolted or screwed on and it's full tang. This kind of a knife is not as strong as that, and you can definitely break these kind of knives, and there's certainly been situations where individuals have broken these pilot survival knives. That's not unheard of. You can find, I think if you look around on the web, you can definitely find pictures and stories of guys breaking these, but for $40, $50, it, to me, and with the sheath that you get, is a good quality blade. It's an excellent tool. I wanted to give you some closer up views of the knife and the sheath in particular, as well as talk a little bit about the pouch on the sheath and the sharpening stone which came with this blade. I've used the sharpening stone a lot on this knife and on other knives, and have been very happy with it, and continue to use it, and actually have removed it from this knife because I don't carry this knife all the time, and I've put it into a little sewing kit. And I've got a Bic lighter on this side, and I keep the sharpening stone on this side, and then I'm able to maintain my gear on backpacking trips. Folds up very nicely. It's a little compact kit. So that's where I actually keep this sharpening stone, because I like it so much, and I don't always have this knife with me. But when you purchase the Ontario Air Force survival knife, you're going to get the knife, the sheath, and the sharpening stone. Now I talk, and I'll continue to talk later on in this review, about how I feel that this knife is a good quality blade, and how I think it's a great deal at around $50. You might even be able to find it for around $40. And one of the reasons for that is the sheath. Now it's a very simple sheath. It's just a belt sheath. You've got these loops here to put it on a belt, and it's got a nice solid snap, and it's just very simple. Very simple sheath. But the leather on at least my version of this sheath is very good. I've had knives from SOG, and I like SOG's knives. I like the SOG Seal Pup. I like some of their other knives. I had the Northwest Ranger 2.0, I believe. And its leather sheath fell apart on me. Taking the knife in and out, being very careful, I just started to wear. I've had this knife for over 9 years. And this knife and its sheath have been used heavily by me, and the sheath has held up very, very well. The stitching's held up, the rivets have held up, the snaps held up. Just to show you guys there, it's both stitched and riveted. And the snap is just quality. It's a little brass snap, and it just does a great job. It's a very simple sheath. What I really like too is it's not just leather, it's been reinforced with this metal here. So you can see when they rivet it through, they put this piece of metal back here and then they brought it around. And my understanding is that if you fall because of the way the sheath operates, and somehow the sheath got bent around, that's to prevent the blade coming through the sheath and into your body. So I like that additional reinforcement. Some versions of the Ontario Air Force Survival Knife will be sold with a sheath that does not have that metal reinforcement. And it just has a little leather tab that comes down with these holes to allow you to attach it either vertically, like horizontally, you know, so you could hang it horizontally or vertically. I'm getting messed up here. So you could hang it upside down. It has a leather tab. This has those holes or those holes there. So you can, you know, put it on your chest like so, or you can hang it upside down on your chest and be able to access the blade from those holes, or tie it down to your leg. So that's the reality with the sheath. I would avoid the sheath that doesn't have this metal reinforcement. I really like that. Now this knife came to me used, and it came to me from a friend of mine, and I'm like the second or third owner of this blade outside of the military. I don't know whether this was military surplus. I'm not sure exactly when it was produced. So there might be some slight variations in the way this blade is and the Ontario Air Force Survival Knife that you purchase that's now, you know, maybe 15 years plus, 20 years younger than this blade is. I did make a couple modifications to this blade. When I first got it, I didn't like that there was some movement here. There's some rattling, and you might have heard some rattling, and that's because this leather handle will get larger with a little bit of moisture and will shrink down if it gets in a really hot environment over a long period of time. And so there is a little bit of sometimes rattling, and I thought that that was this cross guard. So I actually took it and had an individual weld, just put a little weld there and a little weld there on the blade, and that promptly, the moment I was using it, broke loose. So that was silly and useless. It doesn't hurt the functionality of the knife. I have noticed years ago, this isn't this case now, when I was in a really dry climate for outdoors almost every day and carrying this knife for about 8 to 12 weeks. And that wasn't a military thing, that was just I was out doing a tremendous amount of camping out in the woods. It was awesome. And I was there for an extended period of time in the wilderness. There were buildings and things around, but we did a lot of outdoor activities, and I had this knife on me all the time, that the handle got a little bit loose, that I could kind of feel it moving a little bit. That's gone away and hasn't been a problem. So I don't know, that annoyed me then at that point, but it's not a problem for me now, and I've used this knife quite a bit out in the snow, as you've seen. So that's just some of the reality there. You can see there, I talk about this being peened on, and what I mean by that is it may be screwed on. I don't know whether this is, it's not full tang in the sense that it's like a wedged, bolted on portion, but there is metal that comes through here, all the way through here, and this might screw on like a bolt, but it can't screw off again. They've actually mashed that metal down, and so when I talk about it being peened on, I mean it's been permanently attached. Unless the knife breaks, the blade breaks off, or somewhere inside that handle. You can see that rattling, there's a little bit of rattling there, and that I think is the way that those two pieces of metal mate up. You might even be able to see a little bit of light through there, but that doesn't hurt the functionality of the blade. That's just a reality of the way it was designed. So that's the Ontario Air Force Survival Knife, some up close views. I'm going to just talk a little bit more here about this saw blade, and I haven't cleaned it just yet, gotten that gunk out there. It's just a bad idea. It's too thick, it's not useful, you're not able to get your hand up on it, and I think that saw is just a silly idea. It's not useful. Maybe I'm being mistaken on what you're supposed to use that for. Maybe there's some purpose for that I'm not understanding, but for my use, for working with wood and things, it's silly. I also talked about how I try not, earlier in the video, how I try not to chop with these knives that are about this size, and that's basically because of physics. Okay, you got 5 inches out there and you're trying to chop. Well, you have to do a lot harder work of chopping if you had something like a hatchet. Okay, physics is now on your side. You've got a long handle and you got more weight out there, and that's just a better option. Or even if you had a big blade like this cold steel Gurkha kukri, that we've got here, now I'm interested in chopping with a blade because of physics, because I've got this blade and I can get out there away from my hand and really do a good job chopping. For me, knives that have a 5-inch blade, 5.5-inch blade, similar to the Ontario Air Force survival knife, they don't excite me for chopping. They excite me for using, fine tasks, for batoning. That's the way I'm going to use this blade. And I think that's the way it was designed to use. When you start chopping and doing things like that, you increase the chances of hurting yourself. Another thing that I would point out is this is a thick blade at 0.18 inches thick. And it's a quality blade. But if you try and baton this thing through something the size of like a telephone pole, if you're trying to split a huge piece of wood, you're probably going to break this, especially if you get it in there and then you have a huge log and you just start hammering away here, or you're trying to go even through a thinner log that has a lot of knots, that's really hardwood, that's not greenwood but that's dried out. You're probably going to be able to break this. So use your equipment carefully. I'm an angry little Scotsman, an angry little Irishman, and I can probably break almost anything that you would put in my hand. That doesn't mean that the tool has failed. That means that you used it inappropriately. So just be careful. If this is your one tool in a survival or camping situation, don't abuse it. Use it carefully. It will do that batoning. I didn't baton more at the introduction of this video because I didn't feel that it served any purpose. And also, while we're on batoning, that's where you're going to take a piece of wood and place it here and hit the back portion of the knife or the tip and drive it through. I'd like you to think about why you're batoning. Why are you using a 5-inch blade knife or 6-inch bladed knife to baton through a piece of wood? What purpose is it serving you? I did that originally to get some kindling, but once you have a few pieces of kindling and you get your fire going, there's no reason to sit there and continue the baton except that you like chopping. Once you have a fire, lay those logs across the fire and allow the fire to do your work for you and burn those pieces of wood apart, shorten them, then push it in. You can even, just to use these as an example, let's say these are 3 pieces of wood, long logs. They're 15 feet long or 10 feet long. And I've got my fire here. In a survival situation, as those logs burn down, I can just scoot them forward, scoot them forward, scoot them forward, allow them to continue to burn, and I'm not expending any more calories. There is a number of people, one in particular, Nut and Fancy, on YouTube, who's very popular, and I subscribe to Nut and Fancy's channel, and I like his videos, but he seems to think that, I don't know whether he batons all the time to show that the knives are durable, or whether he seems to just like batoning wood. And he talks about how this is so much easier to do. The batoning is so much easier to do and better to do than using a hatchet. And my question is, why are you chopping something in the beginning? If you're wanting to split lots of wood, a hatchet or an axe is the way to go. If you're just taking a saw and you're sawing pieces of wood in and now splitting them into kindling, great. But I see a tremendous amount of batoning on YouTube and talked about online that doesn't seem to be serving any purpose at all other than taking up time. And that's cool if you want to do it, but just know that you're endangering your equipment. The more you baton with it, the more likely I think you're going to be to break something, break your knife. So just be aware of that. Use your tools, use your equipment appropriately, and be careful with them. I would definitely recommend the Ontario Air Force Survival Knife. It's inexpensive, around $50. It's a very durable tool. At least that's what I found in my experience. And I would recommend it to you. I think it's an excellent blade. It'll do well in the wilderness, backpacking, camping, or just on day hikes. Thank you very much for your views and your subscriptions. My goal is to produce quality video reviews of shooting, camping, and survival gear. If you like this video, leave a comment. Give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, let me know why. Maybe you've had a bad experience with different Ontario products, or maybe even the Ontario Air Force Survival Knife. Let me know. Thank you very much for your views and your subscriptions. This is the Gear Tester signing off.